Mr. Voss, if you hang up this phone, you may miss the birth of your children. Graham Voss stopped beneath a crystal chandelier while 300 wedding guests waited less than 40 feet away for him to marry another woman. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from today. Leave your city, state, or country in the comments. We'd love to know who's listening. Now, let's uncover the story she never told. Beyond the closed ballroom doors, a string quartet was finishing the final bars before the bridal procession, and thousands of white roses climbed polished columns beneath warm gold light. Everything had been arranged with the precision Graham demanded from the rest of his life. The flowers had arrived from California before sunrise. The champagne cost more per bottle than some families spent on groceries in a month. Security controlled every entrance to the Manhattan hotel. His board members occupied the first 2 rows. Financial reporters waited outside. At 38, Graham had built Voss Meridian into a company worth billions, and people had learned that when he scheduled something, it happened. Then his private phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. Unknown number. He declined it. The phone vibrated again before he could return it to his pocket. Graham's jaw tightened. Only a handful of people had this number, and none of them called twice without a reason. He stepped away from the ballroom doors and answered. Voss. A woman's voice came through, calm but urgent. Mr. Graham Voss? Yes. This is Dr. Evelyn Hart from St. Catherine's Hospital. I'm calling about Laurel Hayes. For one strange second, the sounds around him seemed to move farther away. Graham looked down at his left hand, at the wedding band waiting to be placed there in less than 10 minutes. Laurel. He had not said his ex-wife's first name aloud in months. What happened? She's in labor. Graham stared through the tall windows at the gray Manhattan sky. Rain had begun drawing thin lines across the glass. I think you have the wrong person. I don't. The doctor's certainty unsettled him more than panic would have. Graham lowered his voice. Laurel and I have been divorced for months. I understand. Then why are you calling me? There was a brief silence on the line, just long enough for him to hear a hospital announcement somewhere behind her. Because you're listed in information connected to the pregnancy, Mr. Voss. His fingers tightened around the phone. Pregnancy. The word entered his mind, but refused to settle there. Across the foyer, his best man raised a questioning hand. Graham turned away. How far along is she? Far enough that we're preparing for delivery, but earlier than we'd prefer. Graham swallowed. And you're certain she gave you my name? Another pause. She didn't ask us to call you. That landed differently. Laurel had not called. Laurel had not sent a message. She had not appeared at his office, contacted his attorneys, or demanded anything from him. She had simply gone into labor somewhere across the city while Graham stood beneath chandeliers preparing to promise his future to someone else. Then why did you? He asked. The doctor's voice softened. Because there are circumstances you need to know about. The ballroom doors opened slightly behind him. Music changed. Guests began rising from their seats. The ceremony was starting. Graham could see the edge of the aisle, white petals scattered across it, every face turning toward the entrance where his bride would soon appear. Doctor, he said, tell me exactly what's happening. He heard papers move. Then Dr. Hart said the sentence that emptied every thought from his mind. Laurel is carrying twins. Graham did not move. Twins. 2 babies, Mr. Voss. His heartbeat seemed louder than the quartet. He looked toward the ballroom as the first notes of the bridal march floated into the foyer. And according to the medical information we have, Dr. Hart continued carefully, you are their father. Graham's hand fell against the marble wall. Inside the ballroom, hundreds of guests turned toward the bride. Outside it, Graham stood perfectly still with a phone pressed to his ear, realizing that while everyone beyond those doors was waiting for him to begin a new family, the family he never knew existed was already waiting for him at a hospital. Across town, for several seconds, Graham could hear nothing except the wedding music drifting through the open ballroom doors. Twins. The word refused to belong to his life. He had spent years making decisions from numbers, contracts, forecasts, and facts that could be placed neatly into columns. There was nowhere to place this. How long has she known? He asked. Dr. Hart hesitated. That is something you should discuss with Laurel. Graham looked toward the aisle. His bride had not appeared yet, but every guest was standing. His best man crossed the foyer toward him. Graham lifted one hand, stopping him without explanation. Is Laurel safe? She is being cared for. And the babies? Our team is monitoring them closely. Graham closed his eyes. I am coming. He ended the call before anyone could tell him what that decision would cost. Yet as his hand reached for the ballroom door, a memory surfaced with painful clarity. Laurel sitting across from him at their dining table almost a year earlier, beneath the soft light of a lamp she had chosen when they first moved into the penthouse. 2 plates had gone cold between them. Graham had arrived home nearly 3 hours late. He remembered loosening his tie while reading an email on his phone. We need to talk, Laurel had said. Not tonight. He had kissed her forehead without looking at her face. At the time, he had believed there would always be another night. Their marriage had not collapsed in one spectacular argument. It had disappeared quietly. There had been anniversaries moved around conference calls, dinners canceled for investors, weekends interrupted by flights to Chicago or San Francisco. Laurel had never demanded diamonds or headlines. She had asked for breakfast on Sundays. She had asked him to leave his phone in another room during dinner. Once, she had asked him to take a walk with her through Central Park because the first snow had started falling. He had promised to join her after one more call. When he finally looked up, her coat was gone from the hook. She had walked alone. Months later, Graham came home to find a cream envelope beside his untouched dinner. Laurel was standing near the windows with one suitcase. I cannot keep waiting for you to arrive in your own life, she said. Graham remembered becoming defensive because anger was easier than admitting he understood. So you are leaving? Laurel looked at him for a long moment. I think you left a long time ago. The divorce moved quickly. She did not fight for the penthouse. She did not demand a seat on his company board. She refused the extravagant settlement his attorneys expected her to negotiate. She took what was legally hers and disappeared from the circles that had once photographed them together. Graham had interpreted her silence as proof that she wanted nothing more from him. Now, standing on his wedding day with Dr. Hart's words still echoing in his head, he saw another possibility. Laurel had been carrying his children while he was choosing flowers for another wedding. She had attended appointments without him, heard 2 heartbeats without him, prepared for 2 babies without asking him for anything. His best man finally reached him. Graham, they are ready. Graham looked through the ballroom doors, then down at the white rose pinned to his jacket. Slowly, he removed it. Tell them there is a delay. How long? Graham slipped the flower onto a marble table and reached for his coat. I do not know. Across Manhattan, under the pale hospital lights, Laurel Hayes gripped the edge of her bed as another contraction passed. A nurse adjusted the monitor and spoke gently. We contacted him. Laurel's eyes opened. For the first time that morning, fear crossed her composed face. You called Graham? The nurse nodded. Laurel turned toward the rain streaking the hospital window and whispered, he was never supposed to know. Laurel did not ask whether Graham was coming. She already knew he would. That was the cruel irony of Graham Voss. Once something finally reached him, he moved mountains to control it. The problem had always been getting past the mountains he had built around himself. Another contraction tightened across her abdomen, and Laurel closed her eyes, breathing slowly while the monitor beside her kept its steady rhythm. A nurse named Megan stood near the bed, checking the screens with practiced calm. You are doing well, she said. Laurel managed a faint smile. I would believe you more if you stopped saying that every 5 minutes. Megan smiled back. Occupational habit. Outside the window, rain softened the Manhattan skyline until the buildings looked like gray shadows. Laurel had imagined this day differently. She had imagined morning sunlight, a quiet room, perhaps her sister holding her hand, and 2 small bassinets waiting nearby. She had never imagined Graham leaving another woman's wedding to appear here. You should not have called him, Laurel said. Megan glanced toward the door. Dr. Hart made that decision because of the information in your records. He has another life now. He is still their father. Laurel looked down at the thin hospital blanket covering her. Biology is simpler than fatherhood. She said it without bitterness. That was what made the words heavier. For months, she had practiced living without expecting anything from Graham. She rented a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the Upper West Side, assembled 2 cribs with her sister on a Saturday afternoon, and learned which grocery store delivered after 9 at night. She folded tiny cotton sleepers into drawers and labeled baskets with the kind of organization Graham once teased her about. At appointments, when nurses asked whether the father would be joining her, she learned to answer with the same quiet sentence. No, it will just be me. She had heard both heartbeats for the first time alone. Two quick rhythms filling a dark examination room. Laurel had cried then, but not because Graham was absent. She cried because in that instant the future stopped looking empty. It simply looked different. "Do you want me to tell Dr. Hart that you do not want visitors?" Megan asked. Laurel considered it. Somewhere downtown, there was a ballroom filled with people who expected Graham to stand beside another woman. Laurel had no desire to become the scandal whispered over champagne by Monday morning. "If he comes, I will speak to him," she said. "But I am not asking him to stay." Megan studied her for a moment. "You do not have to decide anything today. Accept what you need today." Laurel turned toward the window again. That sounded simple. Nothing involving Graham had ever been simple. Her phone rested on the table beside the bed. There were no messages from him yet. She was grateful for that. A message could be ignored. Graham himself was harder to ignore. 20 minutes later, the elevator doors opened on the maternity floor. Graham stepped out wearing the same black tuxedo he had chosen for his wedding, but the white rose was gone from his lapel. Rain darkened the shoulders of his coat. He had left his driver behind after traffic stalled 3 blocks from the hospital and walked the remaining distance through the rain. At the nurse's station, he gave Laurel's name. "I am Graham Voss." The nurse looked at him, then at the wedding clothes, understanding more than he wanted her to. "Please wait here." Graham sat beneath fluorescent lights that made the expensive fabric of his tuxedo look strangely ordinary. Across from him stood a small cart carrying pink and blue knitted hats. He stared at them until his phone began vibrating again. His best man, his attorney, his chief of staff, the hotel, then the woman waiting at the altar. Graham turned the phone face down. Behind a closed door 30 feet away, Laurel heard footsteps stop in the hallway. She did not need anyone to tell her who had arrived. Her hand rested protectively over the 2 lives she had spent months preparing to raise without him. Then Dr. Hart entered quietly and said, "Laurel, Graham is here." Laurel drew one slow breath. "Before he comes in," she said, "there is something he needs to understand. I did not keep these babies because I wanted him back." Graham had spent years believing that arriving late was forgivable as long as he eventually arrived. Sitting beneath the fluorescent lights outside Laurel's room, he understood for the first time how much could happen while a person was absent. His phone vibrated against the plastic chair beside him. He did not look at it. Through the hospital windows, Manhattan had nearly disappeared behind the rain. Water ran down the glass in silver lines, blurring buildings where his name appeared on. Offices, contracts, and foundations. None of it could tell him what to say when Laurel opened that door. A nurse approached and quietly told him Dr. Hart would speak with him soon. Graham nodded. Waiting was unfamiliar to him. At Voss Meridian, people moved when he entered a room. Cars waited downstairs. Elevators were held. Meetings started when he arrived. Here, nobody cared what his company was worth. He was simply a man sitting outside the room where his former wife was preparing to give birth to children he had never known existed. His mind returned to the morning Laurel left their penthouse. One suitcase stood beside her. Graham had noticed how small it was and assumed she would return for everything else. She never did. Her books disappeared a week later through a moving service. The framed photograph from their first anniversary vanished from the hallway. The blue coffee mug she used every morning was gone from the kitchen cabinet. The apartment became cleaner after Laurel left, and somehow less livable. Graham filled the silence with work. He flew to Seattle, Dallas, Boston, and London. He acquired another company. He appeared on a magazine cover beneath a headline about discipline and vision. When friends asked about the divorce, he said they wanted different things. It was easier than saying Laurel had wanted something embarrassingly ordinary. Time. Breakfast without a telephone between them. A husband who knew when she had a difficult day without learning it from an assistant. Graham had once thought love was proven by providing everything. Laurel had tried to teach him that presence was something money could not delegate. He had understood the sentence only after she stopped saying it. His phone vibrated again. This time he looked. 12 missed calls. His chief of staff. His attorney. His best man. 3 messages from the hotel. 1 from his bride. Graham stared at her name, then locked the screen without opening the message. The choice felt terrible, but returning to the ballroom now felt impossible. Dr. Hart stepped into the hallway. "Mr. Voss." Graham stood immediately. "How is she?" "Stable. Tired. Focused. Can I see her?" Dr. Hart studied him before answering. Laurel has agreed, but there is something you need to respect. She did not ask you to come, and she does not want a day turned into a conversation about your relationship. Graham's expression tightened. I am not here to argue with her. Good. The doctor opened the door. Graham entered quietly. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and clean linen. Machines gave soft, measured sounds beside the bed. Laurel lay against white pillows, her brown hair pulled loosely away from her face. She looked exhausted, but when her eyes met his, there was nothing helpless in them. Her gaze moved over his tuxedo and stopped at the empty place where his boutonniere had been. You came, she said. Graham stood several feet from the bed. The hospital called. I know. Laurel, why did you not tell me? She looked toward the rain. That is not the question you should be asking first. Graham went still. Laurel rested one hand over her abdomen. Ask whether they are all right. Shame moved quietly across his face. Are they? They are being monitored. Dr. Hart says they are doing well. Graham exhaled. He had not realized he was holding his breath. Why did you do this alone? Laurel looked back at him. Because being alone was better than spending another year waiting for someone who was always almost there. Graham had no defense ready. For once, he did not search for one. Laurel's voice remained calm. I know what today was supposed to be for you. I did not call because I was not trying to stop your wedding. They are my children. Yes. Then I should have known. Something changed in Laurel's eyes, not anger, but an old disappointment he recognized too late. You are right, she said. You should have. Before Graham could answer, Dr. Hart returned and checked the monitor. Her expression remained composed, but her movements became more purposeful. Laurel, things are progressing faster now. Graham instinctively stepped closer, then stopped himself. Laurel noticed. After a moment, she extended her hand, not toward him, but toward the chair beside the bed. If you are going to stay, she said quietly, sit down. For once, Graham just. Be here. Graham sat down. It was such a small thing that Laurel almost smiled at the absurdity of it. For years, she had asked him to stay at dinner, stay home on Sunday, stay long enough to finish a conversation. Now the man who commanded boardrooms across 3 continents sat silently in a hospital chair because she had asked him to be present. He placed his phone face down on the table. It vibrated twice, then again. He ignored it. Laurel noticed. She wished she did not. You can answer that, she said. No. Graham, there are hundreds of people waiting for you. His eyes remained on hers. There are 2 people here I did not know were waiting for me. Laurel looked away. The words were sincere, but sincerity could not restore months he had missed. Do not turn this into something romantic, she said quietly. I am not. You left a wedding. I know. And tomorrow everyone will make that mean whatever story they want. Graham leaned forward, his hands clasped loosely. What does it mean to you? Laurel studied him. The question was different from the ones he used to ask. He was not searching for a problem he could solve. He was waiting for an answer he might not like. It means you came when someone else called you, she said. That is all. Graham lowered his eyes. Another contraction came, and Laurel concentrated on her breathing. He started to rise, uncertain whether to call the nurse, but Laurel lifted one hand. Stay. He sat again. When the moment passed, she opened her eyes and found him watching her with an expression she could not remember seeing during their marriage. Not control, not impatience, fear. Why did you not tell me? He asked. Laurel was quiet for several seconds. Because when I found out, we were already finished. That does not explain it. No, it does not. She adjusted the blanket over her knees. I spent years asking you to choose a life with me. I was not going to use 2 babies to force you into one. Graham shook his head. They would never have been an obligation. Laurel's gaze sharpened. You do not know that. I know myself. So did I. The word stopped him. Laurel continued without raising her voice. I knew exactly what you would do. You would hire the best doctors. You would buy a larger apartment. You would establish trusts before they were born. Your attorneys would create schedules. Your assistants would send reminders. Everything would be perfect. What is wrong with making sure they have everything? Nothing, if everything includes you. Graham looked toward the monitor, where 2 steady rhythms continued beside Laurel's bed. I would have been there. Laurel's expression softened with sadness. You said that about our marriage too. Silence settled between them. Outside, rain tapped gently against the window. Graham looked down at his hands, hands that had signed billion-dollar agreements without trembling. I missed all of it, he said. The appointments. The first ultrasound. Hearing them. Laurel nodded. Yes. Did you know immediately there were two? No. I found out at the first ultrasound. For the first time, a small smile touched her face. The technician told me there were two heartbeats, and I thought she was joking. Graham almost smiled too, but regret reached him first. Were you scared? Terrified? And you went home alone? Laurel looked at him. I went home to a life I was learning how to build. Graham absorbed the distinction. She had not been waiting in some empty apartment for him to rescue her. She had built something beyond him. Dr. Hart entered and checked the monitors, then spoke quietly with the nurse. Graham watched every movement. Everything looks reassuring, the doctor said. But we are getting closer. After she left, Graham remained beside the bed. His phone had finally stopped vibrating. Laurel watched him for a moment. There is something you need to understand before these babies arrive. Graham turned toward her. Anything. I do not want your money to become the reason you are their father. His brow tightened. Laurel. I mean it. They need to be wanted, Graham. Not inherited. The sentence seemed to remove whatever answer he had prepared. He looked at the two moving lines on the monitor, then back at the woman he had once promised never to leave alone. They are wanted, he said. Laurel held his gaze. You have known about them for less than 2 hours. Then give me more than 2 hours to prove it. Laurel's expression did not change. Before she could answer, Dr. Hart returned carrying a thin folder. There is one more thing, she said. She looked from Laurel to Graham. Mr. Voss, you keep saying you were never told about this pregnancy. Graham stood. I was not. Dr. Hart glanced at the papers in her hand. Then I think there is something in Laurel's records you need to see. Graham looked at the folder as if it contained a verdict. Dr. Hart placed it on the small table beside Laurel, then opened to a page marked with a date from nearly 7 months earlier. This was transferred with Laurel's prenatal records, she said. There is a notation showing that information about the pregnancy was sent to your office. Graham did not touch the paper. My office. Laurel's face remained still, but her fingers tightened around the blanket. I told you I did not want to discuss this today. Graham turned toward her. You contacted me? Laurel closed her eyes briefly. Once. The answer was quieter than the rain against the window. When? After the first ultrasound. Graham stared at her. You knew there were twins. Yes. And you tried to tell me. Laurel looked at him again. I called your private office line. Your assistant transferred me to legal because the divorce had just been finalized. I left a message. 2 days later, I sent a letter with a copy of the medical confirmation. Graham finally picked up the page. The notation listed the date, delivery confirmation, and the name of Voss Meridian's Executive Administration Office. He recognized the initials beside the entry. Martin Cole, his chief of staff at the time. I never saw this. I know. Laurel's voice carried no accusation, which made the moment harder to bear. Graham reached for his phone and called his current executive assistant. She answered immediately. Mr. Voss, everyone has been trying to reach you. I need something else first. Search the archived correspondence from my office 7 months ago. Anything from Laurel Hayes regarding personal medical information. There was a pause. How quickly? Graham looked at Laurel. Now. He ended the call. Laurel turned toward Dr. Hart. Can we please focus on the babies? Dr. Hart nodded and returned her attention to the monitors. Graham sat down again, but the folder remained open between them. 10 minutes later, his phone rang. His assistant's voice had changed. I found it. Graham stood and walked toward the window. Tell me. There is a scanned letter from Ms. Hayes. It was received and routed to Executive Legal Review. There is also an internal note from Martin Cole. Graham's reflection stared back at him from the dark glass. Read it. It says the communication was considered potentially related to post-divorce financial claims and was to be handled under existing settlement protocol unless additional legal action was filed. Graham said nothing. There is another note, she continued. No response required from Mr. Voss at this time. The words seemed almost impossible in their neatness. No response required. For words had erased 7 months of his children's lives. Did anyone verify what the letter actually said? He asked. It appears legal received the medical attachment. Graham ended the call slowly. Laurel was watching him. You knew they blocked it? He asked. I knew nobody answered. Why did you not come to me directly? A trace of exhaustion crossed her face. I had spent years trying to reach you directly, Graham. Your office was always the door I had to walk through. He looked down at the phone in his hand. He had built layers of assistants, attorneys, security, and protocol so nothing unnecessary could reach him. He had called it efficiency. Laurel had lived on the other side of it and called it marriage. "I should have known," he said. "Yes. I should have made sure you could reach me." "Yes." There was no satisfaction in her agreement. Only truth. Dr. Hart glanced at the monitors, then stepped closer to Laurel. "We are very close now." The room changed immediately. Nurses entered with calm purpose. Graham moved aside until Laurel reached toward him. Her hand stopped halfway, uncertain. He crossed the distance and offered his. She took it. No forgiveness passed between them. No promise. Just two people standing at the edge of a life neither had expected to share again. Graham felt Laurel's fingers tighten around his as she focused on Dr. Hart's voice. Minutes stretched strangely. His phone began vibrating in his pocket, but he never looked at it. Then a new sound entered the room, small and clear, followed moments later by another. Graham stopped breathing. Two newborn cries rose beneath the quiet instructions of the medical team. Dr. Hart looked toward them with a smile. "You have two babies." Laurel's eyes filled as relief softened her face. Graham could not speak. Through the open doorway, a nurse carried the first baby toward the neonatal team, then the second. Graham watched until they disappeared beyond the room. He had missed the first ultrasound, the first heartbeats, and 7 months of knowing they existed. But as those two tiny voices echoed down the hospital corridor, one thought settled inside him with absolute clarity. He would not miss what came next. The first photograph of Graham leaving the hotel appeared online before he had even seen his children. By the time a nurse guided him toward the neonatal unit, reporters were already gathering beneath the hospital awning, their cameras pointed at every black sedan that stopped near the entrance. Graham knew none of this until his phone lit up with a message from his chief of staff. "Wedding guests are leaving. Press knows you are at St. Catherine's. We need instructions." Graham read the message once, then locked the screen. Through the glass ahead of him were two bassinets surrounded by quiet equipment and nurses moving with careful efficiency. His children were smaller than he had imagined babies could be. One wore a pale blue knitted cap, the other a soft white one. Their tiny hands rested near their faces as they slept beneath warm lights. Graham stopped at the window. Every question waiting outside the hospital suddenly felt very far away. "They are doing well," Dr. Hart said beside him. "They arrived early, so we want to monitor them closely, but both are stable." Graham nodded, unable to take his eyes from the glass. "Can Laurel see them?" "Soon. She needs some rest first." His phone vibrated again. This time the name on the screen made him hesitate. Claire Whitmore, the woman he had left waiting at the altar. Graham stepped several feet away before answering. "Claire." Her silence lasted long enough to carry everything the word could not. "Is it true?" she finally asked. Graham looked through the glass at the two bassinets. "Yes. You have children with Laurel? I just found out today. And you left without telling me." Graham closed his eyes. "I should have spoken to you before I left." "You should have." Her voice remained controlled. "Are you coming back?" Graham watched a nurse gently adjust one of the blankets. He knew what returning would mean. Cars could bring him to the hotel in 20 minutes if traffic cleared. His staff could delay the ceremony. Public relations could create a statement. Florists could replace anything that had wilted. Money could preserve the appearance that the day had only been interrupted. But Graham understood that something more important had already changed. "No," he said. Claire inhaled softly. "Because of Laurel?" "Because I have two children who entered the world today without knowing whether their father would show up." "That is not what I asked." Graham rested one hand against the cold window. "I cannot marry you today and pretend I am the same man who walked into that hotel this morning." Claire did not answer immediately. When she did, there was sadness rather than anger. "Then do not make me wait for a man who already knows he cannot come back." The call ended quietly. Graham stood there for several seconds before putting the phone away. No argument. No dramatic accusation. Just another person paying the price for choices he had postponed making honestly. Near the elevators, his attorney and chief of staff appeared with security. "Graham, we have a situation downstairs," his chief of staff said. "Reporters are asking whether the wedding is canceled. The board wants to know whether this affects tomorrow's announcement. We should move you through the private exit." Graham looked at him. "I am not leaving. We can arrange transportation back later." "You misunderstood me. I am staying here." His attorney lowered his voice. You should consider the public implications. Graham almost laughed, though nothing felt funny. For years, public implications had been allowed to outrank private promises. Issue one statement, he said. The wedding will not continue today. There will be no further comment regarding Laurel or the children. Their privacy is not negotiable. And the board? They can wait. Graham turned back toward the glass. A nurse inside noticed him and motioned toward a chair near one of the bassinets. After washing his hands carefully, Graham entered. He sat beside his daughter first. Her hand shifted beneath the blanket, fingers opening as if searching for something. Graham offered one finger. Her entire hand curled around it. The billionaire who had negotiated across polished tables with people twice his age stared down at 5 tiny fingers holding him with almost no strength at all, and his eyes filled before he could stop them. "Hi," he whispered. That was all. No promise large enough belonged in that room. Across the hall, Laurel had awakened. A nurse helped her sit up and told her Graham was still there. Laurel glanced toward the clock. Hours had passed since he walked away from his ceremony. He did not leave? She asked. No. Laurel looked toward the closed door. She had spent years hearing Graham promise that he would be home soon. For the first time, nobody had asked him to stay, and he had stayed anyway. Laurel found Graham exactly where the nurse said he would be, sitting beside 2 bassinets with his tuxedo jacket folded over the back of a chair and his sleeves rolled carefully to his forearms. He was holding their daughter against his chest while their son slept a few feet away. For a moment, Laurel remained near the doorway. Graham had held presentations before hundreds of investors without showing uncertainty, yet now he barely moved, as though even breathing too deeply might disturb the tiny child in his arms. When he noticed Laurel, he stood halfway before remembering the baby and immediately sat again. You should be resting, he said. Laurel moved slowly toward him. I wanted to see them. Graham looked down at their daughter. Dr. Hart said they are doing well. Laurel nodded and sat beside their son's bassinet. Her fingertips rested against the clear side. The room was quiet except for the soft sounds of the monitors. Graham watched her for several seconds. I canceled the wedding. Laurel did not look up. I heard. Claire deserved an explanation. She deserved more than being left at an altar. Graham accepted the words without defending himself. Yes. Laurel finally turned toward him. Do not cancel one life because you suddenly discovered another, Graham. That is not responsibility. That is panic. His expression tightened. I did not cancel it because I expect you to take me back. Good. The answer came quickly. Graham almost smiled at the familiar certainty in her voice, but the moment was too fragile. I do not know what happens between us, he said. I know, but I know what happens with them. He glanced at the babies. I am here. Laurel studied him. Today you are. Graham lowered his gaze. Months earlier, that sentence might have angered him. Now he understood that trust was not restored by arriving once, no matter how dramatic the arrival. Then I will be here tomorrow, he said. And the day after that. Laurel's eyes remained steady. Do not promise me years when you have only given them hours. Graham nodded slowly. Then I will promise tomorrow. That answer reached her in a way the larger promise would not have. Later, when the babies were resting, Graham followed Laurel back to her room. His chief of staff had sent him a list of private nurses, pediatric specialists, security teams, and several properties that could be prepared within days. Graham placed the phone on the table. I can have your apartment changed before you leave the hospital. 2 additional bedrooms, overnight help, a driver, whatever you need. Laurel stared at him. There it is. What? The Graham Voss solution. He stopped. I am trying to help. I know. But you still think help means purchasing the distance between yourself and a problem. These are my children. I want them protected. Then protect your time. Graham said nothing. Laurel's voice softened, but not the message. They do not need a larger apartment because their father is wealthy. They need a father who knows which one wakes first, which one hates being cold, which one settles when you walk around the room. They need someone who will show up when nobody is taking photographs. Graham looked at his expensive watch, then removed it and placed it beside his phone. Tell me what they need. I cannot teach you fatherhood in an afternoon. Then do not. He pulled the chair closer. Let me learn it. Laurel looked at him for a long time. And if I never come back to you? Graham's face changed, but he did not look away. Then I will still be their father. If I never forgive you, I will still be their father. If there is never another chance for us. He took a slow breath. Then becoming someone better cannot depend on getting you as a reward. Laurel's eyes glistened, but she turned toward the window before he could read too much into it. Outside, the rain had stopped. Graham's phone began vibrating again beneath a stack of unanswered messages. He left it where it was. A nurse entered and told them their son was awake and ready for a feeding. Graham stood. "Can I come?" Laurel looked at the man who once needed an assistant to protect every minute of his schedule. Then she nodded toward the door. "You do not have to ask me whether you can be their father, Graham." He followed her into the hallway. For the first time, he understood that redemption would not happen in one grand decision. It would happen in ordinary rooms, on ordinary mornings, when there was no audience and nothing to gain except the right to be trusted again. For months later, Graham arrived at Laurel's apartment at 7:15 on a cold Saturday morning, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a diaper bag he had packed himself. He was 15 minutes early. Once, Laurel would have noticed because Graham was usually late. Now she noticed because he never was. Their daughter, Sophie, was awake in Laurel's arms, staring toward the doorway with wide blue eyes. Their son, Noah, slept in a bassinet near the window, one tiny fist resting beside his cheek. Graham stepped inside only far enough to close the door against the December air. "Good morning," he whispered. Laurel glanced at the coffee. "You remembered. Oat milk. 1 teaspoon of sugar. You used to forget after 6 years of marriage." Graham gave her a small smile. "I am trying not to waste the things I get a second chance to remember." He did not say more. That had become part of the change too. Graham no longer turned every good intention into a speech. He simply showed up. He had learned that Sophie settled faster when he walked slowly around the room. He knew Noah disliked cold bottles and became restless just before midnight. He knew where Laurel kept the extra blankets, which pediatrician she trusted, and how many diapers fit into the side pocket of the bag. None of those things appeared in newspapers. None increased the value of Voss Meridian. Graham had never worked harder for anything that earned him so little public applause. During the first month, he had taken calls from the hallway so the babies could sleep. During the second, he moved morning meetings because pediatric appointments were not meetings Laurel should attend alone. By the third, he stopped treating fatherhood like something that needed to fit around his schedule and started building his schedule around being a father. Laurel watched without rewarding him too quickly. She had learned the difference between hope and evidence. Graham never asked when she would forgive him. He never asked whether she loved him. He never mentioned the wedding he had canceled. He came, helped, listened, and left when she needed space. That morning, Sophie reached toward him. Graham took her carefully, and she immediately grabbed his coat collar. "Apparently, I belong to her now," he said. "You are only discovering that." Laurel replied. His laugh was quiet and unguarded. Noah stirred. Graham crossed the room and lifted him before he could fully wake. Laurel watched him standing there with one baby against each shoulder. The image should have felt impossible. Instead, it looked ordinary. That was what moved her most. Not the billionaire outside her door. Not the man who had walked away from hundreds of wedding guests. Just Graham, slightly tired, with formula on his sleeve and a burp cloth hanging crookedly over his shoulder. "I thought I would take them to the park if it warms up," he said. "Maybe 45 minutes. Then I will bring them back before their next feeding." Laurel nodded. "Their hats are in the bag." "Both." "Both." Graham checked anyway. Laurel smiled despite herself. He caught it, but did not mention it. He carried the babies toward the door, then stopped. "Laurel." "Yes. Thank you for trusting me with them." She looked at him carefully. "You earned that trust." The word silenced him. For Graham, they were worth more than forgiveness offered too easily. He nodded and reached for the door. "Graham." He turned. Laurel stood beside the small kitchen table. 2 coffee cups were there now, his still untouched. Morning sunlight fell across the apartment, catching the framed photographs of Sophie and Noah on the wall. Laurel looked at the cup, then at him. "The park can wait 10 minutes." Graham did not move. "Are you sure?" Laurel pulled out the chair across from hers. "Sit down before your coffee gets cold." Months earlier, she had asked him for the same simple thing in another home, in another life, and he had always believed there would be time later. This time Graham returned to the table. He sat. He placed his phone face down without being asked. Laurel poured more coffee while their children rested safely in his arms. Nothing had been erased. Nothing had been magically repaired. She had not won him back, because winning him had never been the point. She had rebuilt a life that no longer required his presence to feel complete, and Graham had finally learned that love was not something wealth could secure or regret could demand. It was something earned quietly, one ordinary morning at a time. He had left one life in a single afternoon to meet his children, but finding his way back to the woman across from him had taken the one thing his billions had never been able to buy: time. Some stories end with regret. Others begin with freedom. If you enjoyed this story, please like, share, and subscribe to Stories She Never Told. And remember, sometimes the story she never told is the one that changed her life.